Okay, well, thanks for being here and listening to me. I'm gonna talk about the citizenship process and the benefits and requirements for becoming a U.S. citizen. And I I will also talk about the sometimes the difficulties on becoming a U.S. citizen that are imposed for by the federal government, in their requirements. But I'll just start by uh, sharing my presentation. So, well, you all know we are in this. So this is our agency. We're in Denton. We're just 4 people, only 2 of them full time. We're based at a church that started this program, and then the program became independent, but we're still there. And we do all kinds of stuff for immigration legal services with United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the agency in the Department of Homeland Security that administers the citizenship program according to the law. And that's why one of the items in there is citizenship. Of course, notice that it's all English and Spanish, because most of the immigrants in this country in general, and even more in Texas, are Spanish speakers, and so are our clientele. So, look, I I became a U.S. citizen in 1985, 3 months after I got married, right after graduating from college. And it only took me 3 months to acquire permanent residence. It was a quick process. And then 30 plus years later, I became a citizen, but that took me a year and a half. And so there is a lot of water under the bridge. And so why would you want to become a citizen now when it's more difficult and it requires more scrutiny from the government? Here are some of the items why. And the first one is very important: family reunification. A lot of people come here to this country, become permanent resident, but they left people behind, or they have immediate family that are not as lucky and they're not residents. And so becoming a citizen becomes an important thing because it makes it a lot easier to petition for them. For example, all your children, once you become a citizen, almost automatically become citizens themselves. There is some procedure, bureaucratic procedure that has to happen. And that's a way, by the way, that my wife became a citizen, because she was one of 6 children that left Cuba and her father became an asylee in this country. And so she became a US citizen. And then when she was about to enter college, or in college, she wanted to go to Europe, and then she realized, oh, wait a minute, I don't have a passport. And so she had to apply for certificate of citizenship to show that she had acquired citizenship. And then she got her passport and she was able to travel to Europe. Faster citizenship for spouse. Once you become a US citizen, then if your spouse is not a US citizen, then that person can become a citizen quicker. we'll see later one of the requirements. And one of them is that you have to be a permanent resident for 5 years. But if you are the spouse of a US citizen, it's only 3 years. Full civic participation. Well, you can vote, you can be elected, you can participate in a jury, travel benefits. Well, this applies to if you become a citizen and you're from a country that has where there is some kind of difficulty in acquiring visas and traveling to certain countries. Well, in general, being a US citizen allows you to travel to more places because there are more agreements with different countries and either not needing visas or the process of getting a visa quicker. And hopefully that will continue. That's not a guarantee, but public benefits. Well, once you're a citizen, you have access to all of the public benefits in the law. And some of those public benefits are exclusively assigned to US citizens, and other people that are not citizens cannot get them. More employment and educational opportunities. Well, for one, you can be a civil servant. You can work for the US government. It's a lot more difficult to work for the US government if you're not a US citizen, especially in certain areas. And other types of jobs, for example, require things like security clearance and all that stuff. And sometimes those things are only allowed for US citizens. Protection from deportation and exclusion. And that's something that typically people say, hey, I am a good guy, I'm a good citizen, a good person here, living here, I have my permanent residence, and why should I get in trouble? Well, the immigration law, it's like a minefield of stuff. And so you're only subject to immigration law if you are not a US citizen. So imagine that. You save all of that minefield. You don't have to worry about it because now you're a US citizen. I have known people that were permanent residents, had US citizen children and everything. And for stuff that started as a traffic stop ended up with her deportation. That could happen to you. You don't know. And so, it's, this country, loves insurance. Well, so acquiring US citizenship, in a sense, is an insurance policy for you not having to think about or worry about those kinds of things. So I want to talk a little more detail about family reunification, because after all, that's the reason our agency, that's our main mission, keeping families together. And in immigration law, there is this thing called the Visa Bulletin. And Congress every year assigns quotas for different kinds of relatives of people that are citizens and permanent residents. And in general, if you're a citizen, then you either are not subject to any quota, and so you can get your relatives permanent resident status right away, or right away in the government standards is the current amount of time it takes to process an application, which it may not be right away. It may be 3 months, 6 months, a year, year and a half, depending on type of application, but at least you're on top of the line. And that's what it means by waiting time shorter for family petitions in general, okay? But then there's other things, like if you're a US citizen, then you can petition, for example, for your children that were born overseas and that are older than 18 or 21 years old, or they're married or other things. So it's better to be a US citizen if you need to petition for someone to uh, become a permanent resident and be able to immigrate to the US. Now, what are the eligibility requirements? So this is like a checklist that you have to do before you even think about applying for US citizenship. You have to be at least 18 years old. So if you're a youngster, you have to wait. Then there is a series of requirements. This list may not be complete because the immigration law is like 2,500 pages of stuff. And so there may be other stuff that is more obscure that may apply or not. But in general, you have to have become a permanent resident for at least 5 years. And then not only that, but you have to have had at least 30 months of continuous residence in the US. And this is for people that travel a lot for business and other reasons. I, for example, when I was a permanent resident, I became what they call an expat, which is an employee of a US corporation living overseas for an extended period of time. And one of the things they had to do, or I had to go through, and the company had to sponsor me, was to get a special dispensation, but not from the Pope, but from the US government, that I was allowed to live outside of the country for more than 6 months and not be stripped of my US permanent residence. So there is a whole set of requirements about, how long have you lived in this country continuously, and how long have you been outside of the country without any kind of the dispensation that I just mentioned. So that's what it says. Long absences from the US may break continuous residence. And this is terrible. If you don't know about this, you may just go overseas and spend some time and yada, yada. And then when you come back, they say, hey, no, your permanent residence has been revoked because you've been outside of the country for so long and you don't have any special permit or dispensation, right? So this is something to be aware of for people that are in that category. And then the last one is just, okay, well, you have to, if you move, then at least you have to wait at least 3 months to apply for citizenship from your new location. There is an English test. And the English test, we'll talk about a little more about this when we talk about the interview, but at least you have to be able to read, write, speak, and understand, and well, it's kind of logical, right? Then you have to pass a US history and civics test. And that's kind of logical too, right? You have to know the history of your country, but we'll talk about that a little more later. Testing exceptions. For example, when I became a US citizen, I qualified for doing all this process in Spanish. But since I've been living here since 1982, but not uninterruptedly, I spent like 3 years in Mexico in the 90s. And so I didn't have to pass the English test, and I could take everything in Spanish. But I didn't need to, but hey, that's it. And then there's other things like disability. Like, And then if you have disability, there is a special process, a special form, that you can file, and then it exempts you. It could exempt you either or both from the, I think it's both, from the English proficiency test and from the civics test. Good moral character. Okay, so basically, this boils down to not having had any kind of trouble with the law in terms of criminal record. That's a reason they take your fingerprints, and we'll see that later. It's because they run an FBI background check, and possibly also in the state and the local police, to see whether you have a criminal record or whether you have been arrested or issued even a citation. The concept of crime in immigration law is much more overarching than the concept of crime in criminal law. And so one has to be careful with this. Not take it lightly, because initially I said, good moral character, come on, I'm a family man, I go, I provide for my family, I'm a, decent person, but maybe you had one or two encounters with, law enforcement, and that may have provoked some kind of record, and you don't know, and the criminal justice system may have ignored them because for them it's irrelevant, but not for immigration law. And so if you have any kind of problems with in your history here in the country with the law, you should look at it more carefully. Selective service. This is kind of funny because there is no more draft. I don't know for how long, but for some reason, every male, regardless of their, nationality, immigration status, or anything, within the ages of 18 and 26, has to register for this thing called selective service. And that's like a soft equivalent of a possible draft. That's what that means. That if there is some incredible, extraordinary circumstance and the country is at war and they need more soldiers, they look at the selective service roster and start calling people into service. Even if you're not documented, you could be undocumented and still be recruited. I mean, the armed forces accept undocumented people. That's something like I find amazing. You say, why? They're not legally in the country. What allegiance can you, ask from these people? But anyway, in this case, it's selective service. But this is like a soft requirement. Like, unless you are 18, unless you are within that range and you want to apply for citizenship and you don't read this and you go to any post office and there is there is the application, and then you sign the application, whatever, and send it, and that's it, you're registered. But it could cause you trouble if you're within the ages of 18 and 26 and you haven't. It didn't cause trouble for me. I didn't even know this thing when I got to this country. When I became a permanent resident, nobody told me about this thing. And so at the 50 plus years of age, I go and try to apply for citizenship, and this thing about the selective service comes up, and they say, well, you have to write a letter to the selective service. So I write the letter to selective service. Nothing happened. Why? Well, because I've been, I'm 50 plus years of age, and then I wrote the letter. Hey, when I entered the country, nobody told me about it. When I went through the process of becoming a permanent resident, nobody told me about it. So how come you're telling me about it now? You know, anyway. So, but this is something to look after if you're in that age range, and you should do it. There's nothing to it. Oath of allegiance. Well, of course, you know, once you are, this only happens if you are approved to become a U.S. citizen. Then you have to go into the USCIS offices and take an oath of allegiance. And then part of the oath of allegiance is that you have to renounce allegiance to any other countries. In my case, I'm a citizen of 3 countries. So I had to formally renounce allegiance to any of those other 2 countries I'm a citizen of. One by birth and one by mother's right. Okay, so the application process. So now you say, okay, yeah, well, you know, all that stuff is cool. So now what do I do? The first thing, USCIS is very good about right now. I mean, they've been, it's kind of funny because as immigration policies get stricter and stricter, USCIS in the last, you know, few years have improved their presence and information that they provide online. So you can go online, and I'll show you later. And then, for example, you can get a naturalization guide. You can complete the N400 form, application for naturalization, I think, online. And then things like 2 passport photos and the necessary documents for demonstrate your eligibility. And then, of course, you have to sign your forms. And people may think that's trivial, but if you don't sign your form, it'll be returned to you. So you send in your application, photograph, document, everything, all right? And there's an address. And as I told you, there may be now, I mean, I didn't really check, but some of these forms can be filed online, so you don't even have to send it. Sometimes they accept scanned stuff or whatever. And then this N648 medical certification for disability exceptions, that's what applies when I told you about like if you want to apply for citizenship and you have a disability. And so, and it's basically a form that your doctor has to fill out. But the USCIS is very particular about the language that has to be in that form, which is kind of counterintuitive because, you know, I don't know your experience, but my experience with doctors is that anything a doctor writes, it's almost like in a cryptic language and very short. And I remember at one point, doctors even putting prescriptions in handwriting that I would say, well, these pharmacists must be like, you know, some special people that can read all this stuff. They probably didn't understand, and they had to call the doctor to tell them what the prescription was. So now they're asking doctors to fill out all of this detailed explanation on what the disability of the person is, and in plain language, which the doctors are not used to using. They use all these, like, you know, medical lingo, you know, scientific stuff. Oh, but USCIS officers are not scientists. They're just, they just want to see all that stuff in regular language. So if you qualify for some kind of disability exception, that's something that you have to look at very carefully. We recently had an applicant. She was, she had some learning deficiencies and, you know, mental health problems. And she was seeing regularly a doctor in there, a community doctor. And the community doctor filled out the form 648, was rejected. Then they sent her on a wild goose chase for a civil surgeon, which is something that they shouldn't have done because that's only when you are applying for permanent residence. And so, but we told her, well, you know, you went, no, we didn't talk to her because of this disability. We talked to her father. And So, well, the father decided, oh, I'm just going to pay the $200 for a civil surgeon to send a report. But then they also sent a report from the clinic, an updated report. And then they went again to the interview and they were like, oh, they didn't give them an answer there. And then eventually they sent them a letter saying, yeah, welcome to America. But they had to sweat for it and suffer unnecessarily, in my opinion. So then you had to go to a biometrics, check you for your fingerprints, because again, fingerprints are important because that's what determines what your background is. And finally, if all that stuff is complete and vetted, then you get an interview. And then you have to report at the USCIS office at that time and take the interview. You complete it, and then you receive a decision. If everything is very fine, you receive the decision right there and there at the end of the interview. If there are some questions or issues that the USCIS officer raises in his head or her head and tells you or not about it, then you get a deferred decision. So you will be getting a letter from USCIS about their decision. And then if the decision is positive, then you get a notice to take the oath of allegiance, which is what is called the naturalization ceremony. Once you take the oath of allegiance, you get your certificate of naturalization, and that's it. There was one more step here, which is outside of the immigration process, but very important for people. The first thing you should do once you get your certificate of naturalization is go out there to any post office and apply for a passport. Because a passport is a lot more useful than a piece of paper saying that you're a naturalized citizen. And so once you have your passport, then you can relax. Now, I talked about the interview. Yeah, the interview is kind of tricky, and it didn't used to be like that. It wasn't for me. Well, that's because I had been a U.S. resident for over 30 years. I had a family, and I didn't have any criminal record or anything. Okay, so no red flags. But for other people, for whatever reason, it may be difficult. So that's why we have this section here on the U.S. interview. So the first thing is that, of course, there is always updates. I mean, even this person I talked to you about that had a handicap, and finally she got her notice to go to the naturalization. Even when you go to the oath of allegiance, they ask you for that. Prepare corrections. Anything new in your life? Because I applied for citizenship in December 2016, and my interview was in April 2018. So that's a long time. So I could have gone overseas, I could have done this, I could have done that, whatever. And so they want an update. Then, of course, the English test is really not a formal test that you go like, write down in paper or orally. It's just the interaction with the immigration officer in front of you. So they'll ask you about anything, and it'll start when you start talking to them. You have to bring, the required documentation that they tell you, because they'll send you a letter, and the letter will have in detail what you have to bring. But on the other hand, you may want to bring everything you put into the naturalization interview, anything you put into your permanent residence application, all of that paperwork regarding your life. It's good to bring just in case they ask for it. because they can ask for anything. This is not like a regular, legal process where, a judge sits in front of you and says, yes or no. And if they say, yes, you're innocent, then nobody else will ask you any time in the future about that. Nobody will open that record unless extremely different circumstances or difficult circumstances. But in the case of immigration, every time you go there, ask for a benefit, they can open up your record and look at the first thing you filed, like maybe 10, 20, 30 years ago. And they can ask you questions about it. And if you have the wrong answer, maybe you get in trouble. And so this is something you have to take lightly, the interview. And that's what it says here. The officer may ask you why you want to become a United States citizen. Do not take this question lightly. Well, I would say do not take any question lightly and make sure that you answer in a way that you can support. So have a serious answer prepared. And so that's, I was talking about, like small talk, that's just English, English proficiency testing, right? Or maybe they'll ask you about stuff related to whether you know what the process is, for applying for citizenship, which is, do you understand the reason for your interview? And see, well, then you have to figure out, well, what is it that they're trying to determine, right? Because you filed all the required paperwork and the paperwork was approved. So this is something that is basically like a test of whether you were telling the truth or not, you're a reliable person, you have good moral character, all of those things, they all come into play in this interview. So it's not something to take lightly, but it's not to scare everybody, but only, only to like advise people that to take all this stuff seriously. Like in my case, when my interview, it was like less than 15 minutes. And at the end of the interview, and this is the scary part, the immigration officer said, oh yeah, well, and then he showed me records like from 1985, a bank statement that we filed when I was applying for permanent residence. So they know everything. I mean, the government must have like a large part of the US underground is full of government vaults with any information or any type of petition or whatever that you have filed with immigration and everybody else and other stuff. And so think about that and remember it when you answer questions and say, what did I say then? Well, they know. And sometimes they have the time to know, because that's why it took me like a year and a half to become a citizen, even though I had been living here for over 30 years, which I found crazy, but anyway. So these are some, the civics test is another deal. And that's just to show that what they're trying to determine whether you know about the history of the country and all this stuff. And so this is like, a crash, what you have to do is like a crash course on US history. And this is very unfair, I tell you, because if you give the citizenship, the civics questions, which by now, because by December 1, they changed them and there are more questions. If you ask any high school graduate, and chances are like over half of the high school graduates will fail these tests, but you have to pass it to become a citizen. So be prepared. This is like a, not even multiple choice because it's in, well, when I went, it was the officer asking you and you have to respond. So you don't have multiple choice. You have to just give one answer, and that answer must be the correct answer. And at that time, there were 10 questions, and that they ask you. And if you answer correctly 6 of them, then that's fine. Now it's more strict. Okay, so what do you do now? How do you prepare for this? Well, USCIS, I can bitch and moan about USCIS, but as I told you, USCIS has been very good about putting a lot of stuff online in terms of helping people know what the rules are and what the information is. And they have this Citizenship Resource Center. They have it in 2 languages, Spanish, English, and so there you can find from, well, what's required, what is it, they have, they publish all of the questions that they may ask. And so, and I think at the moment, there are 128 questions or something like that. And so it's basically like preparing for a test where you know all the questions, and they're only going to ask you from 10 to 15 questions. And so you have to basically study them and find the correct answer and memorize them. So it's hard, but that's what it takes. But I tell you, on the other hand, I came to the country for university. I didn't study US government or anything. And but I've been an informed person, reading the paper, whatever. And so 30 years later, when I went online and tried to do the test, well, I got like 98%. And I said, oh, okay, well, these are not that difficult. Now they're becoming a little more difficult. But they may be more difficult for people that haven't been here for so long and they're not familiar with it and so forth and so on. So you have to take this seriously and study, And then for languages other than English and Spanish, then they have this multilingual resource center in the USCIS site. Unfortunately, they don't have everything for every language. Like the first language in the list, which is alphabetic, is Amharic, which is a language of the Arabic family, and the Aramaic is also part of that family. And that is the official language of Ethiopia. But for Ethiopians, they only have in Amharic information about asylum. Well, I guess that's what's the most relevant thing for people from Ethiopia. It's all based on statistics and what people from different countries and languages spoken in the world would come to the US for. And so that's what this multilingual resource center is. It's not just like a blanket translation of everything, but there is always Google Translate. You can translate any page, any web page into any language using Google Translate, and it's gotten really, really good. Part of my activity is translating Spanish to English and English to Spanish. And at the beginning, I was very, very leery of Google Translate because they had all these errors and said, no, forget it. But lately, I've been pleasantly surprised that it's gotten a lot better. Although they still have problems with gender and other things that don't exist in the English language in many things and exist in other languages like Spanish. But so you can go and you see this, this highlighted in green is the actual website. And that's all, folks, what I have. I hope I didn't bother you to that. If you have any questions, just, this is the time to post them to me. Perhaps I can answer them or give you some pointers or where to find answers.